In May of 2016, I was finally able to realize a bucket list dream to explore America's Great Lakes, and at the same time visit my brother who lived in Buffalo, New York. It was a trip through our country's north woods, northern Minnesota, Lake Superior, Michigan's Upper Peninsula, Mackinac Island, and Niagara Falls. On the way back home to Tennessee, I stopped by the Amish community around Millersburg, Ohio.
The ice sheet melted from the Great Lakes region about 10,000 years ago, but climate change and the rebounding terrain continued to transform the lakes. Finally, 2,500 years ago, the Great Lakes became the natural wonders we know today, the foundations of a unique ecosystem where plants, animals, aquatic organisms, and people interact in an environment exceptionally rich in natural resources. Lake Superior is the largest freshwater lake in the world and the first in a series of enormous steps leading water down to the sea. It flows from the southeast corner of Lake Superior down the St. Mary's River into Lake Huron, 23 feet below. Lake Huron connects to Lake Michigan at the Straits of Mackinac, which separate the upper and lower peninsulas of Michigan. These two Great Lakes have the same surface elevation and are considered by many to be a single lake. From there, water flows down the St. Clair River to Lake St. Clair and the Detroit River, which feeds Lake Erie, the shallowest of the Great Lakes. Water flows north from Lake Erie into the Niagara River, where it cascades over the 200-foot cliffs of the American and Horseshoe Falls, known collectively as Niagara Falls. It then enters the fifth and final Great Lake, Ontario. From Lake Ontario, water flows into the St. Lawrence River for the final drop to the Gulf of St. Lawrence on the Atlantic Ocean.
Here we see the Great Lakes in a profile view. The first Europeans to explore the Great Lakes were French fur traders, missionaries, and adventurers. They came in search of beaver skins to make beaver hats that were highly popular in Europe during the 16 and 1700s. They came to bring Christianity to the New World and to make the New World a part of France. Their travels brought them in close contact with Native Americans who inhabited the region. In fact, their explorations were possible only with the help of Indian guides. Father Jacques Marquette, a Jesuit priest, founded missions at Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan in 1668 and St. Ignace, Michigan in 1671. In 1673, Marquette joined with Louis Joliet to explore and map the upper Mississippi River basin. They followed the river to within 435 miles of the Gulf of Mexico, then turned back fearing an encounter with Spanish explorers. They re-entered Lake Michigan near present-day Chicago. Robert de La Salle built and sailed the first ship on the Great Lakes beyond Niagara Falls. In 1679, he sailed Lee Griffin into Lake Michigan. In 1682, he led an expedition down the Mississippi River to the Gulf Coast and claimed the entire Mississippi River basin for France. He named the new territory La Louisiane. Meanwhile, the English who had settled along the Atlantic coast and around Hudson Bay competed with the French in the fur trade and for control of the North American continent. This struggle came to a head with the French and Indian War, lasting from 1754 to 1763. British colonists outnumbered French colonists by 20 to 1. However, the French would rely heavily on their alliances with various Indian tribes. George Washington commanded Virginia militiamen in fighting around Fort Duquesne, which is present-day Pittsburgh. In one of the great battles of history, a British army under General Wolfe defeated the French commanded by Louis-Joseph Montcalm on the Plains of Abraham near Quebec City in 1759. Both generals were killed in the battle. The British thus captured Quebec and gained control over the St. Lawrence River, cutting off the French colonies from their primary avenue of reinforcement and resupply. The French finally capitulated and signed the Treaty of Paris in 1763, turning over all American territory east of the Mississippi to the British. During the War of 1812, the United States fought several important battles with the British along the Great Lakes. The U.S. Fort Mackinac on Mackinac Island was captured by the British at the very start of the war in 1812. American troops attempted to recapture the fort in 1814 but failed. Thus, Britain controlled ship traffic through this important strait throughout the war. Americans gained control of Lake Erie in 1813 when a flotilla of U.S. ships under Commodore Oliver Perry defeated and captured a British fleet just off the Ohio coast. It was here that Perry sent the famous message to his commander, "We have met the enemy and they are ours." This allowed American land forces to recapture Detroit and then defeat the British along with their Indian Confederation under Tecumseh in the Battle of the Thames. Tecumseh was killed and the Indian Confederation disappeared, along with the threat of British attack in Ohio, Pennsylvania, and western New York. My journey started with a trip through the flat country of western Minnesota and along the Canadian border to Niagara Falls, reputed to be the coldest city in the lower 48 states. Here you can cross the International Bridge on the Rainy River into Canada or visit one of the largest paper mills in the country. From Niagara Falls, I headed down through the Mesabi Iron Range, where most of the iron ore in the U.S. is mined and processed. The Mesabi Range was first discovered in 1866 and initially produced high-grade ore containing up to 65% iron in both underground and open-pit mines. Now all of the mines are open-pit and mostly produce lower-grade ore which must be processed into taconite balls. The taconite is loaded onto rail cars and hauled to Duluth or Two Harbors. Here it is transferred to ore-carrying lake freighters that then travel to the steel mills in Ohio or Indiana. The world's largest open-pit mine is the Hull Rust Mahoning Mine in Hibbing, Minnesota. Now I'm on the northern shore of Lake Superior and travel north along the coastline to reach the village of Grand Portage, Minnesota, on the Ojibwe Indian Reservation. I'm here to spend a night at the Grand Portage Indian Lodge and Casino and to catch a boat ride to Isle Royale National Park the next morning. Grand Portage was once a busy fur trading post for the British Northwest Company, and was the start of an 8.5 mile portage along the water trade route from Montreal and the Great Lakes to the northwestern wilderness. First traveled by Indians, the Grand Portage bypassed a series of falls and rapids extending along the last 21 miles of the Pigeon River. In 1958, the route of the Grand Portage became a national monument and is now a well-used hiking trail. The trading post on the shore of Lake Superior has been recreated with a stockade and buildings to resemble those of the old trading post. Every summer, the Ojibwe Indian tribe, in conjunction with the local community, conducts a summer rendezvous reenacting the Northwest Company's annual event from the 1700s, where traders and Indians got together for a grand celebration. The Isle Royale National Park is an uninhabited 50-mile-long island in the middle of Lake Superior. It actually is inhabited by several thousand moose and 2 wolves. The wolf population varies since they can cross the ice in winter to reach the mainland. The island was inhabited at one time and sustained logging and fishing industries. It also has small copper deposits that were worked in the past. The park now has about 15,000 visitors annually, who come primarily to hike and camp in the rugged outdoors. No vehicles of any type are allowed on the island. You reach Isle Royale during the spring months by making reservations on a boat, the Voyager 2, that makes a twice-weekly run to the island, then returns to Grand Portage the next day. The boat overnights at Rock Harbor on the eastern end of Isle Royale. We departed Grand Portage at 7:30 on a cool, breezy morning for a 2-hour run to the western end of Isle Royale. As the island begins to take shape, we spot the Rock of Ages lighthouse that sits on a rock pile at the eastern tip. 3 ships have foundered on these rocks since 1877. We start to enter Washington Harbor for our first stop at the Wendigo Ranger Station, and our boat captain points out a spot in the water where you can actually see the remains of a sunken ship. This is the SS America, which sank in 1927 after striking submerged rocks. She carried passengers, freight, and mail north from Duluth to the remote communities in the upper part of Lake Superior. We finally pull into the dock at the park headquarters in Wendigo and are greeted by a group of park rangers who proceed with an orientation to Isle Royale. Most of the passengers are hikers who leave the boat here to hike the length of the island over the next week or so. The Voyager 2 now pulls out of Washington Harbor and proceeds along the island's north shore to the eastern end, where we finally dock at Rock Harbor late in the afternoon. I had wanted to overnight at Rock Harbor Lodge, but learned that it wouldn't open until the first week in June, so I wound up camping in one of the shelters at the Rock Harbor campground. My Tennessee sleeping bag proved quite inadequate for the cold night on Isle Royale. The next morning, myself and several hikers who had walked the length of the island boarded the boat for a return to Grand Portage. The following day, I drive south along Lake Superior's north shore through numerous summer resort communities. It's a beautiful, quite pristine area, just now waking up to spring. Winters are long and cold in northern Minnesota. The Ojibwe people called Superior Gitchigami, or Great Sea. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, in his epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha, calls the lake Gitchigumi. It's the largest, coldest, and most remote of the Great Lakes. I'm stopped along the roadside taking pictures when this old-timer pulls up behind me to welcome me to the area. He had seen my Tennessee license plates. Near the community of Schroeder, Minnesota, the highway goes over the Cross River. So I stop for pictures and discover this monument to a famous Catholic priest from the 1800s, Father Frederick Baraga. He was often referred to as the snowshoe priest because of his long hikes on snowshoes to reach his parishioners. He was a noted grammarian of Native American languages and became bishop of the Marquette, Michigan Catholic Diocese. Next comes Silver Bay, Minnesota, with its iron ore processing and loading facility, now owned by the Cleveland Cliffs Mining Company. Low-grade ore is brought here by train from the mine 45 miles to the west and processed into taconite pellets, then loaded onto lake freighters for shipment to the steel mills. The Split Rock Lighthouse is one of the most notable landmarks along Superior's north shore. There are more than 50 lighthouses situated on the rocky shores of the lake. Split Rock Light Station was commissioned in 1910 after a disastrous storm in 1905 sank or damaged 29 ships on western Lake Superior. This location was particularly critical because large iron deposits in the area make compass readings unreliable. During its first 20 years, the station was accessible only by boat, so 3 lighthouse keepers and their families lived on site during the shipping season and then left for the winter months. After road access became available in the 1930s, the keepers began living on site year-round. The light was decommissioned in 1969 and is now a favorite tourist attraction, with local folks reenacting the roles of lighthouse keeper and his wife. Finally, I reached the southwestern tip of Lake Superior and the city of Duluth, Minnesota. Duluth and its twin city of Superior, Wisconsin, form the Great Lakes' largest shipping port, transporting coal, iron ore, and grain. Duluth has a reputation of being one of the coldest cities in the lower 48 states, but I also found it to be a very beautiful city with a gorgeous lakeshore drive and a residential area in green hills overlooking Lake Superior. A great many lake freighters called Lakers and ocean-going ships called Salties come to Duluth to pick up cargoes. My trip around Lake Superior takes me next along the south shore to the Bayfield Peninsula and the resort village of Bayfield, Wisconsin. It's the gateway to the Apostle Island National Lakeshore with its 21 islands out in Lake Superior. I'm doing the Apostle Island boat tour on the following day, so I check into the Bayfield Inn and then walk around town, which is noted for sailing and sailing regattas. You can catch a ferry over to Mackinac Island with its vacation homes and well-known resort town of La Pointe, Wisconsin. Mackinac is the largest of the Apostle Islands and the only one not part of the National Lakeshore. Bayfield is home to an artist community and is host to an arts festival each summer that draws artists from across the Midwest. It also sponsors the Apostle Island sled dog race each winter with 50 to 75 teams competing. It turns out to be a perfectly beautiful spring day for my boat tour of the Apostle Islands. The tour boat is a new fiberglass model with enclosed seating on the lower deck and open-air seating on the upper deck. The upper deck is quite breezy when the boat is underway. Northern Wisconsin along the coast of Lake Superior is rural, but it isn't wild. Farms and orchards have been cleared here for generations. Highways twist through the woods. There are grocery stores and bars. There's Dairy Queen and the internet. Hippies raise chickens on organic farms, and good old boys buy high-tension fishing line at Walmart. But just a few miles offshore, you can find land where time seems to have stopped a couple of hundred years ago. The Apostle Islands National Lakeshore, a group of 21 islands and a strip of coastline, are meant to be wilderness. All are uninhabited. From a passing boat or even from the occasional sandy bay, It's easy to imagine that they were never inhabited at all. Sandstone cliffs make landings difficult. The forests that top the cliffs are thick and deep, broken only by trails carved out by the Park Service. You look at it and you think that this must be the America that the local Ojibwe knew before European colonization. Pristine and unchanged. The truth is far more interesting. Back in the 1930s, at the end of the logging era, a government official who inspected the islands with the idea of creating a national park declared that this landscape was far too badly damaged by mining and logging to ever become a national park. These islands were not always a place for relaxation. 100 years ago, Americans lived and worked on them. What looks like wildlands today were once the clear-cut sites of industrial camps for fishermen, loggers, and quarrymen. On Basswood and Hermit Islands, as well as other islands, quarrymen worked to chisel out chunks of sandstone that would become the brownstone building blocks of Chicago, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and Milwaukee, all serving a demand for stone that was driven by Romanesque revival architectural style, and new city ordinances drawn up in response to the 1871 Chicago fire that required certain buildings to be made from stone rather than wood. The Apostle Islands, with a healthy supply of high-quality stone and a quick connection to Great Lakes shipping, made for ideal quarry locations. Unfortunately, steel frame construction was invented around 1900, and the stone was no longer required. Our tour boat weaves its way among the islands until we reach the outermost island, which is named Devil's Island. The politician and author Samuel Fifield wrote in 1899 that the Indians in the early days declared it to be the home of Machi Manito, the evil spirit, whom Kitchi Manituo, the great spirit, had imprisoned there. Hence its name, Devil's Island. Here we find some enchanting sea caves along the north shore. When the surf on the lake is heavy, the waves thunder and boom in these extensive caves. The Ojibwe interpreted this as the voice of the evil spirit imprisoned there. The caves were formed by waves washing against sandstone cliffs over thousands of years.
First sailed her waters in my birch bark canoes. We fished in her rivers, we hunted on her shores. But many a brave warrior was taken down by her beneath her cold blue waters, never to return. But I loved her then. She called me back again. Oh, I loved her then. Then I sailed her waters in my ships of wind and sail, to carry away her treasures and live to tell the tale. But many a proud sailing ship was taken down by her, and many a fine sailor was never to
Now I'm driving along the shore of Lake Superior and stop at this delightful little wood carving shop. At Ashland, Wisconsin, I encounter this gorgeous old stone bank building. The stone probably came from the Apostle Islands. Then it's not long before I start seeing the word Yooper on roadside signs. That's telling me that I'm in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. A Yooper is a native of the Upper Peninsula, probably of Scandinavian descent. The peninsula contains the largest group of Finnish people in America. I also encounter advertisements for pasties, which is actually pronounced pasties. This is not an accoutrement for female dancers, but rather a tasty meat-filled turnover native to the Upper Peninsula. Because of the long, harsh winters and poor soil, the Upper Peninsula is not suitable for agriculture, so the economy relies heavily on tourism, forestry, and some fishing. The cool, breezy summers make this an ideal vacation spot for inhabitants of the big cities like Chicago, Detroit, and Cleveland. A favorite wintertime activity is snowmobiling, with trails running everywhere. Now the road turns to the north, and I start onto another peninsula, this one called the Keweenaw Peninsula. This very rural, sparsely populated region once contained the richest copper mines in the world. It was not unusual to find copper deposits that were 95% metal. Prehistoric Indians mined copper here and traded their copper artifacts as far south as Alabama. Industrial-scale mining began in the mid-1800s and grew until it employed thousands of workers well into the 20th century. The last operating mine shut down in 1995 as the copper deposits finally ran out. Running concurrently with the mining boom in the Keweenaw was the white pine lumber boom. These big trees were cut for mine shaft timbers and to build the growing communities around the mines and elsewhere along the Great Lakes. Most of the logging occurred during the winter months, when then the logs were floated to sawmills in the spring after the ice melted on the lakes and rivers. Very few of the giant old-growth white pine trees remain today. As I drive north through communities that time seems to have forgotten, with names such as Winona, Twin Lakes, and Donkey, I notice concrete strips in the highway where snowmobile trails cross. Then the highway suddenly drops down into a deep valley, and you see the city of Houghton, Michigan, with its giant lift bridge. The bridge crosses the Keweenaw Waterway, a ship channel that cuts across the entire peninsula. It's partly natural and partly man-made. Lake freighters unload in Houghton and Hancock, Michigan, which is Houghton's twin city on the north shore of the waterway. After crossing the waterway, I begin an hour-long drive north to the small community of Copper Harbor at the very tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula. This drive is quite spectacular. The narrow highway twists and turns through an awesome canopy of overhanging trees. Upon arrival in Copper Harbor, I felt like I had reached the end of the world. There are no resort hotels in the village, so I check into an antique 1950s-style motel and looked for an open restaurant in the town, which is just now waking up from a long, cold winter. The next morning, I visit the Fort Wilkins State Park, located just a couple of miles from the Copper Harbor village. The U.S. Army constructed Fort Wilkins during the 1840s copper boom to protect miners from local Chippewa Indians who were threatening violence because of the population influx. The fort was abandoned in 1870 and eventually turned over to the state of Michigan. Now I'm driving through some of the pristine countryside of Michigan's Upper Peninsula with its stands of white pine trees. and along the shore of Lake Superior. My trip will take me to the small town of Munising, Michigan, and the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. Here's another of those old buildings built from Apostle Island sandstone. I have booked a 3-hour boat trip with the Pictured Rocks Cruise Line to view the colorful cliffs along the Pictured Rocks National Lakeshore. The park extends for 42 miles along the hilly shoreline of Lake Superior and contains some of the most spectacular natural scenery found anywhere. The U.S. Congress made Pictured Rocks the first officially designated National Lakeshore in 1966. Today, it gets over 1/2 million visitors annually. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's epic poem, The Song of Hiawatha, is set in the Pictured Rocks area of Lake Superior. The epic is the retelling of an Indian legend that relates the adventures of an Ojibwe warrior named Hiawatha and the tragedy of his love for Minnehaha. Minnehaha eventually dies during a severe winter. The story of Hiawatha is much celebrated in American music and art. Now we're passing Grand Island and the East Channel Lighthouse. The colors in the cliffs are created by the large amount of minerals in the rock. Streaks on the face of the cliffs come from groundwater leaching out of the rock and carrying various minerals. As the water evaporates, the minerals leave streaks of color: manganese, black-white, limonite, yellow-brown, copper, pink-green, and other minerals. The cliffs are up to 200 feet above lake level, and in some places have been naturally sculpted into shallow caves, arches, formations that resemble castle turrets, and human profiles, among others. Traveling past the cliffs, in some ways, resembles watching a grand fireworks display.
Fast on a rough road, riding high through the mountains, climbing, twisting, turning further from my home. Young, like a new moon rising, fierce through the rain and lightning, wandering out into this great unknown. And I don't want no one to cry, but tell them if I don't survive, I was born free. I was born free. I was born free.
My first stop the following day is Whitefish Point Lighthouse and the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. Over 240 shipwrecks have occurred in the vicinity of Whitefish Point, making it the most dangerous area for navigation on the entire Great Lakes. The lighthouse is the oldest and arguably the most important light on Lake Superior. It was first lit in 1849 and through various upgrades has been in continuous operation ever since. The old buildings at Whitefish Point were once part of a Coast Guard life-saving station, but now belong to the Great Lakes Shipwreck Museum. The museum features shipwreck memorabilia, with one whole wing dedicated to the wreck of the SS Edmund Fitzgerald in 1975. The Fitzgerald's demise was the biggest and most famous of all the Great Lakes shipwrecks. Part of the fame was due to Gordon Lightfoot's 1976 hit song, The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. When launched in 1958, the Fitzgerald was the largest ship on the Great Lakes and remains the largest to have sunk there. For 17 years, she hauled taconite pellets from Duluth to the steel mills along Lake Erie and set many haul records. Carrying a full cargo of almost 30,000 tons of iron ore pellets, the Fitzgerald set out from Duluth on her ill-fated voyage on the afternoon of November 9, 1975. By the next day, she was caught in a severe storm on Lake Superior, with near hurricane-force winds and waves up to 35 feet. Shortly after 7 p.m., she suddenly sank in 530 feet of water, just 17 miles off the coast at Whitefish Point. Although Fitzgerald had reported being in difficulty earlier, no distress signal was sent before she sank. Her crew of 29 perished, and no bodies were ever recovered. After 40 years of investigation and speculation, no final conclusion about the cause of the disaster has ever been determined. My next stop is at Sault Ste. Marie and the Soo Locks. These locks allow ships to bypass rapids on the St. Mary's River and thus pass from Lake Huron into Lake Superior. About 10,000 ships pass through these locks every year from April through December. Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan is a twin city to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario on the Canadian side of the St. Mary's River. The two cities are connected by an international bridge at the west end of the locks. Before the first lock was built in 1855, a ship traveling on the St. Mary's River would stop short of the rapids and unload the cargo to have it portaged about a mile, then reloaded on another ship. During the copper boom in the Upper Peninsula, entire ships would be put on rollers and slowly pulled for up to 3 months to get around the rapids. As ships became larger and more numerous, additional larger locks were built. There are now a total of 4 locks with 3 in actual use. The locks have become a major tourist attraction, yet at the same time a potential target for saboteurs. So the Army Corps of Engineers has constructed a viewing stand along the shoreline which permits visitors to look over the top of security fencing around the locks. Here we see tourist shops along Water Street in Sault Ste. Marie. After Niagara Falls, Mackinac Island is probably the most renowned vacation spot in the Great Lakes region. It is famous as a National Historic Landmark, as a center for cultural events, and for its various architectural styles, including the well-known Victorian Grand Hotel. It is also noted as a place without motor vehicles. Only horses and bicycles are allowed. I spend a day and a night there and enjoy every minute. I park my car at Shepler's Boat Dock in St. Ignace, Michigan, and catch a boat over to Mackinac. It's a gorgeous spring day, perfect for a boat ride. We pass by the Mackinac Bridge in the distance. Then the island and the Grand Hotel come into view. The boat pulls into a harbor on the south side of the island, and all of the carefully protected architecture becomes visible. I will be staying at the Harbor View Inn, so I find a guy with a bicycle pulling a cart and get him to take my bags to the inn. I will be walking. It's only about 4 blocks along the waterfront. There is no traffic noise or vehicle exhaust, only the occasional clop-clop of a horse-drawn carriage and happy human conversation. I soon reach the inn and get checked in. The place is old but well maintained and pleasantly decorated. Now I rent a bicycle and ride east away from the village toward Mission Point. Along the way I pass St. Anne Catholic Church, originally founded by Jesuit Father Charles Dablon in 1670. Then 1 year later it was relocated to St. Ignace by the French missionary and explorer Father Jacques Marquette. The British took control of the Straits of Mackinac after the French and Indian War, and Major Patrick Sinclair chose the bluffs of the island for Fort Mackinac, and at the same time moved the church back to Mackinac. The U.S. government took over the island after the War of 1812 and maintained Fort Mackinac until 1895, when they turned the island over to the state of Michigan. It became the first Michigan state park. Mission Point is the state park headquarters with beautifully landscaped grounds. This was once a Presbyterian boarding school for Indian children. There is also a historical museum with exhibits concerning the maritime history of the island and the Mackinac Bridge. I now pedal over to the other side of the island and climb the hill to the Grand Hotel, where I find the tulips in full bloom. The Grand Hotel dates back to 1887, when it was constructed as a summer resort by a railroad and steamship consortium to bring vacationers up north from the big industrial cities of the Great Lakes. Travel guides rank the Grand Hotel among the top 10 hotels in the entire world. The hotel boasts the world's longest front porch, overlooking a vast tea garden and the resort-scale Esther Williams swimming pool. These areas are often used by guests on a casual family vacation, for large conventions, or concerts during the hotel's annual Labor Day Jazz Festival. U.S. presidents have been regular guests at the hotel, and Mark Twain once used the hotel as a normal stop on his speaking tours. The Grand Hotel became the setting for the 1980 movie Somewhere in Time, starring Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour. Every October, the hotel hosts an annual convention for fans of the cult classic movie. Guests arrive at the hotel in a horse-drawn carriage with a coachman in red jacket and top hat. During the summer season, they will pay $600 per night and up for one of 385 individually decorated guest rooms. There are a grand suite and a presidential suite, and 7 special suites that have been named for and designed by 7 former First Ladies of the United States. Located at the south end of the hotel is a Victorian-era themed ice cream parlor that features large cones with 3 giant scoops of a delicious confection. After eating one of these, I feel that I have enough energy to jump back on my bike and head down through the village. I have dinner that evening at a waterfront restaurant in the Mackinac Harbor, watching gulls diving for scraps thrown out by diners. I arrived early the next morning to catch an 8 a.m. boat back to the mainland. But it's too early for the taxis, so I must drag my own bags down to the dock. Horse-drawn carts making early morning deliveries are about the only thing moving at that early hour on this summer resort. My boat trip back to the mainland is uneventful.
"552 feet above the Straits of Mackinac, one can see a view that until 1957 was available only to birds and pilots. The Straits of Mackinac is a 5-mile wide stretch of water that was created by a melting glacier nearly 13,000 years ago. It is the meeting place of two of the 5 Great Lakes.
Here, through this 5-mile wide strip of water, known as the Straits of Mackinac, shipping men anticipate that one day more traffic will pass than the combined tonnage that sails through the Panama and Suez canals.
While connecting these bodies of water, the Straits acts as a barrier between Michigan's upper and lower peninsulas. Until the latter half of this century, a boat crossing was required in order to go from one part of the state to the other. That crossing used to take an hour or more, depending on the weather and the backup of traffic. In late November, as deer hunters converged to Michigan's game-rich UP, the wait for a ferry crossing could be as long as a day. Then came November 1st, 1957, the day the ferry stopped and the mighty Mac was opened.
Today, the Mackinac Bridge remains one of our country's greatest engineering achievements. It carries an average of over 12,000 cars per day, and nearly 200 million vehicles have crossed. The cost is $4 per car. Every Labor Day, 2 lanes of the bridge are closed to traffic and open to walkers for the Mackinac Bridge Walk. Now I'm driving through Michigan's Lower Peninsula and along the northeast coast of Lake Michigan, headed for the Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore. This is a summer playground and resort area with small cities such as Petoskey, Michigan. It is also a retirement area for those who don't mind the long winters and lake effect snow.
The streets all by themselves. I remember times that happened to me and how glad I was to be set free. I wish that I could feel that way right now. Maybe it's something in the water. Maybe it's something in the air. Maybe the leaves in the autumn that keep me coming back here. I'm a Michigan girl.
The Sleeping Bear Dunes National Lakeshore includes 35 miles of coastline along Lake Michigan and the North and South Manitou Islands. The government created this park in 1970 in order to preserve a wild and scenic section of Lake Michigan's shoreline that happens to include some shifting sand dunes. The park is named after a Chippewa Indian legend, which holds that a mother bear and her 2 cubs tried to swim across Lake Michigan to escape a forest fire on the western shore. The exhausted mother bear finally made it to shore and lay down on a high bluff, waiting in hopes her cubs would finally appear. Impressed by the mother bear's determination and spirit, the Great Spirit created two islands, North and South Manitou Islands, to commemorate the lost cubs. Eventually, the winds buried the sleeping bear under the sands of the dunes, where she waits to this day. We can obtain a good sampling of the park's many features by taking the 7-mile Pierce Stocking Drive that loops through the woods and along the dunes that overlook Lake Michigan. This drive was part of a privately owned park developed by Michigan lumberman Pierce Stocking, and then sold to the National Park Service in 1977 to become part of the National Lakeshore. Near the end of the drive, we arrive at Lake Michigan Overlook, with a steep sandy bank leading down to the lake, and an overlook platform providing great vistas of the park and Lake Michigan. Very few things in nature capture the feeling of raw power and majesty like Niagara Falls. It is one of the most visited and most highly regarded natural wonders in the entire world. Upon the viewing the falls, noted author Vanita Kinra wrote, "Niagara Falls is the hanging tongue on the face of the earth, drooling endlessly over its own beauty." So I spend almost a whole day and night here, soaking up the beauty and significance of this magical place. Niagara Falls is actually 3 separate falls: the Horseshoe Falls, the American Falls, and the Bridal Veil Falls. The Horseshoe Falls lie mostly in Canada, and the American Falls entirely on the American side, separated by Goat Island. The smaller Bridal Veil Falls is also on the American side, separated from the other falls by Luna Island. These photos were taken from the Skylon Tower on the Canadian side of the river. Located on the Niagara River, which drains Lake Erie into Lake Ontario, the combined falls form the highest flow rate of any waterfall in the entire world, with a vertical drop of more than 165 feet. Horseshoe Falls is the most powerful waterfall in North America as measured by height and flow rate. Ships are able to bypass Niagara Falls and travel directly from Lake Ontario to Lake Erie by using the Welland Canal. It has 8 locks that lift ships a total of 326 feet. Artists first began painting Niagara Falls in the early 1800s, but even before that, it was becoming a tourist attraction and a honeymoon venue. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte's younger brother, Jerome, honeymooned at the falls with his American bride. Honeymooning at the falls is a tradition that has continued down through the years and is still in vogue today. The enormous energy of Niagara Falls has long been recognized as a potential source of power. At first, water diverted from the Niagara River was used to drive water wheels that powered mills along the gorge below the falls. Then in 1881, the first hydroelectric generating station was built. It produced direct current electricity that ran machinery at local mills and lit some village streets. In 1896, the famous electrical engineer Nikola Tesla proved that he could transmit electrical energy from Niagara Falls to Buffalo, New York, using his new alternating current electrical system. This was the first long-distance commercial use of the AC electrical system that is now used around the world today. The industrial development and tawdry tourist attractions around Niagara Falls began to destroy the area's natural beauty by the late 1800s. A group of concerned New York citizens, led by Frederick Law Olmsted, the designer of New York City's Central Park, began to push for greater government control to preserve this beautiful area, where the masses could be renewed. In 1885, the New York legislature created the nation's first state park to preserve the thundering wonder of Niagara Falls for future generations. Part of the lore of Niagara Falls is the daredevils who have used the falls to attempt to achieve fame and fortune. Annie Edson Taylor was the first person to go over the falls in a barrel and survive. She hoped to secure her later years financially through the fame of going over the falls in a custom-made wooden barrel with a padded mattress inside. On October 24, 1901, her 63rd birthday, she climbed in her barrel, secured the top, and let the river current carry her over the Horseshoe Falls. 20 minutes later, the barrel was pulled out of the river, and she climbed out battered but alive. Soon after exiting the barrel, she said, "No one ought ever do that again." Annie did not achieve any financial success from this stunt, as she died penniless about 20 years later. Since Annie's historic ride, 14 people have intentionally gone over the falls in or on a device. Some have survived, but others have drowned or been severely injured. Bobby Leach went over in a steel barrel in 1911, then later died after slipping on an orange peel in New Zealand. A 7-year-old boy, Roger Woodward, was accidentally swept over the falls in 1960 after his small boat capsized just above the falls. Wearing a life jacket, he survived the fall and was rescued by the Maid of the Mist tour boat. It is now illegal to attempt the stunt on either side of the border. Still, other fame seekers have walked a tightrope strung across the gorge below the falls, starting with Charles Blondin, who crossed Niagara Gorge in 1859. These daredevils drew huge crowds to witness their exploits. In 1876, 23-year-old Italian Maria Spalterini was the only woman ever to cross the gorge on a tightrope, making 4 crossings over 18 days. In 2012, Nick Walenda became the first person to walk across the falls in 116 years. After receiving special permission from both governments, he walked across near the brink of Horseshoe Falls, a distance of 1,800 feet. A highlight of any trip to Niagara Falls is donning rain jackets and riding through the spray at the falls on one of the Maid of the Mist tour boats. These boats have operated more or less continuously since 1846, providing tourists a chance to see and feel the falls up close and personal. You buy a ticket, then walk out onto a platform high above the river and take a high-speed elevator down to the boat dock at the river's edge. A young lady hands you a blue rain jacket, and you board the boat while pulling on the jacket. The boat pulls out into the river, and you soon approach American Falls. find it difficult to record video as the lens quickly coats with spray, so it's down to individual pictures and wiping off the water after each click. Now we are headed back to the dock and past the other boat that is moving out toward the mist. Our boat swings around under the Rainbow Bridge, and we're soon back on dry land looking for a new challenge. The tour director points out a stairway that leads to a viewing area near the bottom of the American Falls. So without taking off the rain jackets, we all head up the stairway and once again find ourselves in the mist. This tour is now over, so it's back down to the dock and up the elevator to the big viewing platform. I decide to take another walk around the park and encounter this group of Amish people who seem to be enjoying themselves. And then these girls from a Catholic school. I next drive over to Goat Island to view Horseshoe Falls from Terrapin Point, but find that this viewing spot is under construction. The big new hotels on the Canadian side now seem quite close. So now I decide to have lunch at this restaurant near Horseshoe Falls. I'm soon joined by a seagull who's grabbing a little lunch as well. On the way out, a cute squirrel catches my attention. To end my visit, I take a trolley ride around the park and encounter these views of the mighty Niagara River. I spend 3 days with my brother Ralph in Buffalo, New York, then drive down to Millersburg, Ohio, and the Amish community. It's a rural area in northern Ohio, among rolling hills with old churches and old cemeteries. The roadsides everywhere are decorated with purple and white wildflowers.
This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New
Like
York
most small
Island,
southern
from
towns,
the Redwood
Millersburg
Forest
has a town
to the
square
Gulf
with
Stream
an old courthouse.
waters.
It too has a
This
Civil
land
War
was made
monument,
for you and
only
me.
this one being a Union
As I was
soldier.
walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway. I saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me.
Then I drive out into the countryside where the Amish reside. It's a Sunday, so I find no activity whatsoever, but I do encounter a couple of Amish horse-drawn carts. The Amish first settled Holmes County in 1809, moving here from Pennsylvania. They are descended from German-Swiss ancestry and continue to this day to speak a German dialect commonly referred to as Pennsylvania Dutch. Of course, they also speak English for communication outside their religious fraternity. It is estimated there are 275,000 Amish living in the U.S. and Canada. About half live in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Indiana. The rest are spread over 30 states and Ontario in Canada. They originated from the Anabaptists and the Mennonites who populated northern Switzerland and Alsace in eastern France. They were severely persecuted in Europe because of their refusal to serve in the military and to participate in the local state-sponsored religion, either Catholic or Reformed Protestant. Many thousands immigrated to America and Canada, where they have tried to retain their old customs of simplicity in their dress and their day-to-day living. Amish music comes from the Ausbund, an ancient Christian songbook that traces its beginnings back to the 17th century Anabaptists. The core of the Ausbund is based on 51 songs written by Anabaptists who were imprisoned in a castle dungeon in Passau, Germany, between 1535 and 1540. Many more songs were added over the next 200 years. Das Loblied, or Hymn of Praise, is today sung at the beginning of each Amish worship service. The Amish are total pacifists and are exempted from serving in the military. Most Old Order Amish are homeschooled or attend their own schools and don't go beyond the 8th grade. They are considered expert farmers even though they don't use tractors or other powered farm equipment. They are also noted for their craftsmanship in furniture making and barn construction. Amish women excel at cooking and food preservation. Most Amish communities are closed societies. Although Amish young people occasionally leave the community, very seldom does an outsider ever join. Amish youth are discouraged from marrying outside their religion. Most Amish sects do not pay Social Security tax, nor do they receive Social Security benefits. They do not believe in health insurance, and this can present major problems with the high cost of modern health care. Regardless of the conflicts with modern society, the Amish community continues to grow and at the same time preserve a cherished way of life, proof that America does have freedom of religion. Now we take a short road trip through beautiful Holmes County, Ohio.